Welcome. We are the Mental Barbell, your go-to resource for everything mental performance. We're here to talk about sports psychology, and everything in between. Welcome to the ultimate mental performance journey. Welcome to the Mental Barbell. My name is Ian Reardon, and I'm here with my co-host, Anthony Carnevale. Anthony, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Ian. How about you?
I'm doing very well. The weather's starting to turn, getting a little bit of sunshine here in West Michigan. Just enjoying the championship season of winter sports now. We got March Madness. Just finished watching my alma mater, Kenyon College, compete in swimming. Did very well there, so I've been enjoying kind of the turning of the seasons, the championship seasons. But how about yourself?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the Marist basketball teams weren't able to make the NCAA tournament this year, despite having a pretty good season for both of them. But I've been watching a little bit of the March Madness bracket, and I think there's been, at least from what I could tell, a lot less upsets than typical than we've seen in the recent years. No one beating 16s or two beating 15s to my knowledge. And I think it just shows like how you can handle pressure or like how you can handle expectations. Because I think when we think about a 1 versus 16 seed, we kind of think of like, oh, this is going to be a 30-point game probably at this point. And so when you're the 16 seed, it's really easy probably to just perform without any expectations or any pressure because there's really nothing you have to lose as far as like how the media and other forms demonstrate it. But if you're the higher seed, or I guess the lower seed in this case, depending on how you want to look at it, there's all the pressure in the world because it is the expectation that you're going to win and not win, but like basically steamroll this team is the expectation until you face somebody maybe even in the second round. So how do you handle that? I guess is like the question that a lot of teams probably face. Do you have any thoughts about that, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a lot of good points, and I think the one thing to really consider is actually the adoption of mental skills training and sports psychology training and coaches in elite basketball. So just like what you said, that ability to handle super high pressure, handle those clutch situations, I think you're gonna see people falter less, right? You're gonna see fewer of those big teams make mental errors because they are spending so much time now working on their mental game, working on the preparation for for March to compete at the highest level. So on one level, it's exciting when you don't see a lot of mental mistakes because you're seeing the best teams compete. They're bringing, their best game. I also think it's fun to see crazy brackets, right? You see big upsets and see, deep teams go, deep into the tournament. But I think that the fact that there's less upsets really is a reflection that those teams are spending more time on the mental side of sports, right? They're able to handle those high pressure situations better, and they're not making mental errors that lead to those big upset situations. So, on one hand, I do like to see the wild bracket season, but on the other hand, it's great to see some high level basketball, some high level competition, and I think that's going to be a trend in the future. You're going to see less and less. Big mistakes because people are more prepared for that moment.
Yeah, I would agree. Just to even put the hammer on the nail a little bit too, I saw a graphic the other day that a lot of the teams, I think in the Sweet 16 now, I don't think there's one team in the Sweet 16 where the entire starting five started at that school and stayed at that school.
Mm.
So just to show like if you're there, a lot of students are transferring and they're still able to integrate into the culture of the team and perform at a very high level. So you would have to maybe lean kind of what you're saying, lean towards the idea that that mental training is a big component of it, to think that you're able to perform at this high of a level while transferring not just you but other teammates as well. So that integration and performing at the high level, you would guess that mental skills are playing a big role in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I've noticed in working with teams that a lot of the work that we do is very individual, right? One-on-one coaching, working with coaches on how to talk to specific athletes, things to that nature. But what mental skills training really does to teams is it gives you a common language. So the more you know about yourself, the more you know how you want to be communicated with. The more you know about other teammates, you know how they want to be communicated with. So it really puts everybody on the same page. And then, transferring teams, if everybody has that common, psychological language, that mental skills language, to fall back on, then everybody is kind of on that same page, and you can plug and play players onto different teams a little bit more, like you're saying, because each player is a little bit more secure in their identity rather than relying on the identity around them of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of related to our topic today, I think the mental skills also help us hit peak performance and being in the zone. Um, so I don't know if you want to kind of go into that now or not, but I think that's a good kind of segue.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about working with a sports psychology, coach or a mental skills coach. And we have a lot of tools and techniques and things that can help improve performance. But I think, at least on this channel, we haven't really talked about the ultimate goal of the work that we do. And I think that's what you're seeing in those college basketball, in the March Madness tournament, is you're seeing a lot of just the word that you used, a lot of peak performance, a lot of players playing in the zone. And again, I think that's a credit and a testament to that mental skills training. So today, for the main topic of our podcast, we're going to get a little bit more into what exactly that peak performance zone is. We use the more technical term of the flow state, but you can also call it, like I said, peak performance, being in the zone, being on a hot streak. But that is the fundamental goal of all of the work that we do. We want to put athletes in that state or as close to that state as consistently as possible. So um, the kind of fundamental work or fundamental book, I think, in this field is a book called Flow by a man called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I will link that down in
Nice job with the pronunciation.
thank you. It's taken a lot of practice. But I will link the book down there in the description below. But I would highly recommend anybody listen to that. Or anybody read that book. That is kind of the foremost text in this field. It goes a little bit more into kind of the spiritual side of it, and a little bit more of the artistic expression, as well as some of the athletic contexts. But as we'll get into a little bit later here in the podcast, some of those more spiritual states or states of consciousness can be really important when we're looking at a state like flow. So, Anthony, I'll pass it over to you. If you could just give us maybe a quick rundown of what flow is, and maybe some of the characteristics that accompany that state of mind.
Yeah, so when we think of flow, peak performance, optimal performance, whatever word you want to throw on to the title of it, it's what it comes down to is playing at your absolute best, is when we think it was what we think of that. So, you know, I guess maybe more of a clinical or technical definition is a mental state of complete absorption in an activity. In this state, actions and decisions feel automatic and fluid, leading to peak performance creativity. So, I guess what is that kind of, how do we get there? What are the characteristics of that? So, clear goals. So we know what the task is and what direction you need to go in. So for athletes, what does that look like? So, I think for me, being like in a former basketball player, the goal was to, get the ball and score. As somebody that was like more of a scoring person, that's what the clear task, clear goal, direction, behavior there. And then you get immediate feedback. So you get direct feedback on your performance. So like a lot of the time, sports is you get pretty quick feedback in a lot of cases. Baseball, you swing and you miss, or you throw the pitch and there's a hit. Or basketball, you shoot and you make it, or you shoot and you miss. So there's direct feedback in that moment. So immediate feedback is part of this process, because if you're not able to get immediate feedback, then you're not able to make the mental changes required in order to get into peak performance. And then there's this really important area between balance, between challenge and skill. So if you kind of look at it like a graph, challenge and skill meet at a certain point. But typically when we're in a flow state, it's typically just above our skill level, and it's the right amount of challenge. Because if it's too challenging, you're not going to want to do it. You're going to lose all motivation to do it. And if it's under challenging, then you're going to be under aroused and under motivated to do it. So it's the right amount of challenge. Also with it's usually happening just above what you think your perceived skill set is. So when those two meet at the same time, that's usually a good, I guess, cocktail for like peak performance or being in flow state. And what you notice during this time is a really intense concentration. So intense that a lot of people report like a loss of time, or like time moving really slowly. and a loss of self-consciousness. So you're not concerned with like how other people are perceiving you, how coaches are perceiving you, teammates, opponents, whatever that may look like in that moment. Um, and a really strong sense of control. So like a lot of times athletes talk about the golf hole made it look like the size of an ocean, or like a basketball player said that, it's like shooting a golf ball into the ocean, or like shooting a basketball into the ocean, or the baseball might look really large. So there's like this really strong sense of control, time distortion, and you get this instant, along with the instant feedback, it's intrinsically rewarding. There's even more motivation to kind of continue in this state. So that's a pretty brief definition or kind of view of what that would look like. And hopefully that resonates with other people that have been in the zone before. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, that's a great overview. I think one of the more important characteristics of flow, and you definitely hit the concept here, but is the idea that the challenge and skill, the balance of perceived challenge and perceived skill. So tying this back to March Madness, I think this is really important because, like you said, you do have some lower ranked teams playing some very, very high ranked teams in those earlier rounds. And so if you perceive that challenge to be too hard or too, it's insurmountable, you don't think you're good enough to play, Duke or whatever that team might be. It's going to be harder to enter that peak performance, that flow state. So if we can attack the perception of the challenge, so instead of, building Duke basketball up to be a monolithic, indestructible powerhouse, you can, say we are just as good. We earned our place to play a number 2 ranked team or a number 5 ranked team, right? And so it's about the perception of the skill and the challenge rather than the actual skill and challenge, right? So, an ancient example, right? If you have David versus Goliath, if David doesn't think he can beat Goliath, you don't have that story happening. So it's not necessarily about the reality of the situation, but it's more about your perception of that situation. So I think you did an awesome job kind of outlining that. I think it's really hard to give a definition, a really clear definition of the flow state because it's such a personal experience, a felt experience. But my favorite part of the definition that you went over there is that it's a complete absorption in an activity, right? So you are the line between you and what you're doing is blurred, if not erased, right? So if you're riding a bike, right? If you're cycling, you become the bike. You become the action of cycling. There is not you experiencing pain. There's not you experiencing time. There's just you experiencing the action or the sport that you're participating in. This is so kind of profound and transformative that athletes really spend their whole career chasing things like this. I can say personally, I've probably entered that peak flow state once or twice in my career. We have an example up on our Instagram. Yuri Vlasov, who's a Soviet weightlifter, talked about this moment, called it the white moment, right? It's that moment where everything else disappears and you're fully immersed in what you're doing. And for him, everything went white. So this is really the goal of sports psychology, is to put every athlete in this state or as close to it as often and as many times as you can across a career. There's some interesting features of flow. It's a passive state of mind, so you can't force yourself into it, right? There are some states of mind that you can, right? I can make myself angry. I can make myself happy, whether it's challenging or not. But the state of flow has to be received. So you have to put yourself, or you have to create the right internal environment to receive that state of consciousness, to receive that flow state. I've studied philosophy pretty extensively alongside psychology, and one of my real interests is this flow state being found in many disciplines across the world, across different times, across cultures that had no communication with each other, and in different modalities. So what I mean, a few examples just across history of, we'll start with kind of warrior culture, finding this flow state intentionally. One of my favorites to learn about were the berserkers of these were Norse warriors, so Viking warriors. They would go into battle without any armor on, and they would enter this kind of overwhelming state of bloodlust, right? So this is the flow state applied to war and battle, but they were completely they weren't afraid, they weren't they didn't experience pain, they just were in the fight stage of fight or flight, entering into that flow state for their given task, which in their case was pillaging and fighting. You also see this flow state in other warrior cultures, especially in Japanese cultures. You had the samurai and the Mushin warriors. They came from a school of kind of Zen and Taoist philosophies where the flow state is more of a tranquil state, right? You find a lot of idyllic language, more like pastoral scenes of meditating in a meadow, or you think about a Japanese Zen garden. But what the samurai did was turn that flow state into, again, a combat state of mind, a combat readiness state of mind. So when they did have a sword fight, they were able to more fluidly move and respond to their combatants' sword actions and things like that. So the time between perception and consciousness is gone, right? Because there is no ego anymore. You are what you're doing. This also came up in a lot of my research in ancient Spartan culture with the Spartan warriors. A lot of the training that they did in the agoge, the Spartan military academies, were conquering the mind, right? So one famous kind of anecdote was that they would tie the Spartan warriors to a tree, and they would touch their eyeball with a feather. And one of their tests was that they had to not blink, right? So you had to be able to control your reflexes on that, that grand of a scale. So even your automatic reflexes had to be under your self-control, and that with that control came, the ability to enter the flow state. You're controlling all of those internal environments. Then, with the kind of the ancient philosophy world, we'll stay kind of in that idea. The Japanese idea of wu wei, or effortless action, non-action. There's a lot of similarities in that literature and that description with flow, right? It's not something that you're trying to achieve. It's something that you have to relax and kind of let come about. Kind of same thing in that wu wei definition, or that world in Zen philosophy. So Dr. or Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi goes a lot into art as well. So he discusses painting and jazz as two avenues to enter this flow state. So in my opinion, and kind of looking at all of these different examples of people trying to enter the flow state, I have always thought that flow, or this peak performance, is a very fundamental state of consciousness for humans. That being completely present in one's activity, present in one's observations, being mindful, that is not only a pleasant place to be, but it's an important place to be, whether it be, have a spiritual meaning, or, we're just talking about the neurology and the psychology of mindfulness, but it is a very important state of consciousness to find. Now, in a lot of the examples that I just went through, you find people trying to find that mindfulness state through inaction, right? So whether that be meditating or, mindfully observing something, the idea is that you're calm, you're calming your mind, you're calming your body, and that you're relaxed, you're relaxing into the flow state. I think that you can reach the flow state, and I think it obviously can be reached through action, through sports, through battle, like the berserkers or the samurai or the Spartans. I think it's easier, actually. I would argue that it's easier to be fully immersed in an activity rather than a non-activity, right? You may find glimpses of the flow state, or that egoless, time-distorted state when you're meditating, but I think athletes are much more poised and positioned to find that in competition. So, Anthony, if there's anything there that stuck out to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know that's a little bit of a departure from what we often talk about, but I do think it's a a really important thing to point out that um, people all over time, people all over the globe have been chasing this state of mind.
Yeah, I think what stuck out to me is kind of that because I think in basketball, you're able to get to a flow state probably more often than other sports because you get so many more opportunities to get into a state of flow than other sports. Like baseball, you get up there if you're a batter maybe once every couple innings, or basketball, if you're touching the ball, you're getting up 5 or 6 shots maybe in a couple minutes. So for me, flow state's not like an uncommon experience because of like how readily available it is, I think, in that sport. Um, and I found getting into it in like two kind of different ways, for me at least. One is like the berserker kind of way where um, and my dad found out at like an early age that if I got really angry, I played really well. So, love my dad very much. So not like anything abusive, but he found ways to like maybe get me angry before games. And for whatever reason, that emotion of being angry kind of turned off any like conscious thought processes for me. Because I think when we think of flow, it's like this unconscious focus of being just completely present in the moment. So like I think, in some ways emotions can induce that flow state if done correctly based on like, personality structure and how you absorb information. So for me, anger was always like one, like a healthy amount of anger and like knowing when to turn it off and turn it on was one way to get into the moment. And other times it felt like it kind of just happens. Um, like, I think, the right things, you're doing the right things beforehand. So you're not worried about the outcomes of the game. You're not worried about the outcomes of the person you're playing against or the defensive structure that the coach is going to put against you or how they're guarding you. You're just kind of in the moment playing basketball in this case. And once you see your first couple shots go in, everything kind of just turns off and you know that it's just like it's going to happen and you're just kind of letting it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate your insight there with basketball because, we've looked at research and we'll talk about some research later on in this episode that different sports have different felt experiences of flow. So in the study we'll talk about, I think weightlifters experience the least amount of flow just because they're such a condensed effort. Their effort doesn't last long enough to really enter that flow state. But I think you can enter that state of consciousness in training, right? You can enter it in other areas that then still benefit that performance. So, in my experience in swimming, same kind of thing. Your whole race really only lasts 2, 4, 5 minutes, and that's if you're on the longer end of things. So it's harder to find that flow state than it would be over, a long basketball game. So I definitely appreciate your perspective there. I also think what you said about self-analyzing your peak performance is important for athletes, right? A lot of times this just kind of comes about accidentally, right? Like we have a great game and we don't really know why. But if you can take some time to reflect and say, what was going on in my mind, what was going on in my life that led to that great game. There's a body of research that grew from the original kind of flow idea and flow study. One of the more prominent studies came out in 2013 from a researcher named Schaefer. They proposed 7 really conditions that have to be met in order for this flow state to come about. So again, we talked about it being a passive state of mind. So it's not something that you can force, but it's something that you have to set the right conditions for and then be receptive to experiencing. Those 7 conditions, we'll just kind of go quickly through them and then we'll talk about why they're important. But the first is knowing what to do. Second is knowing how to do it. Third is knowing how well you're doing it. The fourth is, where to go. Like if you need to move around the court, if you need to move around a course. High perceived challenge. So again, we talked about perceiving the challenge as it is something difficult, but it's not so difficult that you can't at least try. The sixth is high perceived skill. So you're going to find flow in things that you're pretty good at. So you have to think you're pretty good at what you do. And then the last is freedom from distraction. So given those seven conditions, you can really start to see how a lot of the tools and techniques that we use and that we teach, they are all geared towards achieving those conditions. So, one of the mental skills that we have of our five is concentration, and number seven is freedom from distraction. Right. So, if you're very highly concentrated, you're going to be free from distraction. The high perceived challenge, high perceived skill, that goes into your self confidence, your self perception. These are all mental skills that we discuss and that we teach. So, the reason that I think this episode is important and this main topic is important is it gives context to a lot of the things that we talk about. So we're not just doing visualization for the sake of visualizing, right? We're doing it so that you can improve your own perceived skill. We're doing it so that you can, rehearse how to do something, right? So that's that second flow condition. So mental rehearsal, knowing what to do, knowing how to do it, knowing where to go if you're on a cycling course and you need to memorize navigation. We've had examples on our social media accounts of F1 drivers doing visualization to memorize a course. And so this flow state, this peak performance zone, this hot streak, right? This zone of high confidence, high skill, high challenge. This is the end goal. This is what we have in mind when we do talk about any mental skills or mental skills training. So with the flow state, there's a host of benefits. We're going to list some of them, but certainly not all of them. So we'll take a quick second here to say, if you as an athlete or even as a coach listening have experienced this flow state or have seen somebody in flow state, please leave a comment down below just talking about your experiences. We'd love to hear it, as it is a personal consciousness state. It's different for everyone. So please leave your thoughts if you have them. Anthony, do you want to talk about some of the benefits, maybe in your own experience, and some of the research-based benefits for the flow state?
Yeah, I think the most obvious one is just like this, whether you're aware of it or not, is this in really enhanced confidence. I think you see like the Steph Currys of the world pulling up from like inside half court when they're feeling it and it goes in. And he wouldn't shoot that because he's unconfident. He's shooting that because he's probably not even aware of like how realistic how bad of a shot it is, but he's just in the flow state. So you're not worried about outcomes. You're only worried about the moment. So like this increased confidence, your concentration, like we said, and focus is significantly higher than what it would be on any other circumstance or occasion, because you're so ingrained into this moment. And obviously, your execution of the task at hand, that's like the whole thing of being in the flow, is that you could do all the stuff, but if you miss it, then you're not in a flow state. So you're executing on all your tasks and your goals at the same time as well. So it's kind of like everything comes together at once. And it's a pretty, I guess for lack of a better word, like a pretty miraculous experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, using that word even lends credence to why all these different cultures and all these different people in different disciplines all over the world have sought after this, this state of mind, because it is so kind of profound. Some other things that I would note, it increased reaction time. So a lot of people that are in flow state, they have that time distortion. So they feel like everything's slowed down, allowing them to perform more precise movements and process things faster. Obviously, time doesn't slow down. It's just their mind is almost sped up to process the situation and the environment faster. You're going to have better adaptability, I think. So you can more quickly adjust to a changing situation. Somebody that is not in this flow state might be very rigid in the way they play. So you see, I've heard this example talked about in UFC fights, right? If there is a fighter that's able to make adjustments mid-fight to their strategy, to their plan, they're more likely to have been in that flow state because they can think and they can analyze and they can change their tactics. And so you're more adaptable to a changing situation. You're less reliant on the rigid plans that you had made. Like I said, our goal is to create this environment, this state as consistently as possible, if you're able to consistently find the flow state, your playing and your competition is going to be way more consistent, right? Because you're not so affected by the current environment. You're not so affected by, whatever jerseys you're playing or whoever's in the stands. You're in your zone every time you play. And I think with the confidence that you mentioned as well, you're going to see less anxiety. If you're confident in who you are, the athlete that you are, how you play, your team, and you're going to go play, a number 2 seed, you're not going to be as anxious because you're coming from a place of security, a place of confidence. So, there's a host of benefits that can come with this flow state. We just are talking about a few of them, but I think it's overwhelmingly clear that if you want to perform well, if you're an athlete, if you're a high performing individual, that you want to find the flow state as often and as consistently as possible. Now, to do that, like we said, we have to take away some of the roadblocks to that state. I think it's important to remember you want to be in flow. Your mind and body want to be united. They want to be executing a skill together, but there are just things that pop up that prevent that. So, let's say you're thinking about a relationship, a fight that you had with a friend, or if you're overwhelmed by the fact that you're playing, in March Madness, in the Final Four, in the Frozen Four, whatever it might be. These are roadblocks to that state, and then someone like us can help you kind of break down those barriers to the flow state and really let that natural performance come about, and that natural state of play, that natural state of mind. So, whenever we teach a new technique, it's helpful to keep in the back of your mind, how is this going to push me towards the flow state, and that's really a litmus test for any technique or any skill, is what is it doing? Is it putting me in a peak performance zone, or is it just kind of wasting my time? So, those are my thoughts on flow here. Anthony, do you have any other kind of closing thoughts before we jump into some of the research about flow?
Yeah, I think, like we've emphasized, if you go looking for flow, you're never going to find it. That's just not how it works. It's kind of like, have you ever had, I don't know if this is a good example or not, but like, if you ever had those like little sparkle dots kind of in your eye line, and you try to like see it, and you try to see it in the center view, it's never going to happen. You can't do it. But if
Yep.
you kind of observe it, without like too much like thought towards it, or like trying to hit it directly, it's able to do that. And I think flow kind of works like that. Like, we're acknowledging things are happening, but we're not being like attached to like all of our thoughts and stuff. So we're more present in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hesitate to give this example because it's not perfect, but highway hypnosis. I know a lot of people experience that, where you're driving on the highway and then 20 miles go by and you're like, wow, I was just kind of driving. I wasn't thinking about it. I don't really remember it. That is a pretty common flow state that people find. The task isn't super challenging, right? Driving a car is something that we're all pretty good at. And our skill level is pretty appropriate. So that highway hypnosis state is kind of akin to this flow state. And again, if you try to force it, it's not going to happen, right? It's almost something that you have to recognize you're in rather than try to make happen. So that's really the crux of flow, and really at the heart of all the work that we do. That's our target. So last podcast, about a month ago, we talked about some research from the lab of Du, Zhu, and Wang. This came out 2025. This study, we briefly went over it last time, but I want to do a little deeper dive because it's more appropriate for what we talked about today. But the study was called Psychological Characteristics and Cognitive Interventions of Flow State in Sports. So as you hear, it's right in line with our topic today. But what these researchers did was evaluate different cognitive interventions and their effect on the experienced flow state. So some of they basically took the 7 characteristics that need to be achieved to find flow, and they figured out cognitive interventions to address each of those characteristics, each of those conditions. So right off the bat, we talked about ego involvement, so that loss of sense, or that loss of sense of self. So you are not a thing experiencing the sport; you are really just the action. To foster that, they did some self examination, and then they did a lot of goal setting. Right, so they talked about what I want to achieve through my sport, and through that process, they were able to eliminate that barrier of ego. Um, Concentration, focus, distractions, those are all things that are important for flow. And so these researchers did some attention training, and they also worked on some visualization techniques to improve their ability to focus. As we said, the challenge versus skill comparison is very important, that ratio. And so they did some cognitive restructuring on, building your self-confidence, but also breaking down challenges. So that's two ways to address this, right? Make yourself feel like your skills are, or recognize that your skills are very elite, and then recognize that the challenge isn't as hard or as insurmountable as it might seem. So approaching that ratio from both sides. Time perception, these researchers addressed it doing simple time management. If you can imagine a Tour de France or a very long competition, you might need to kind of plan each segment individually rather than taking on the whole challenge at once. And so some of that time management can help. And then the clarity of purpose, right? You need to know where you're going, how to do it, and how well you're doing it. That was addressed through some motivational interviewing and goal tracking. So are you improving towards your goals? So the conclusion of this study was pretty overwhelming, that these interventions did in fact improve the flow state of these athletes. As I mentioned earlier, they did across a lot of different sports. So basketball, swimming, these were some of the higher, excuse me, not swimming, but basketball, soccer, these were the higher flow state sports. Some of the lower flow state sports were things like weightlifting, swimming. In the middle, you had track and field, so like some running, sprinting, things like that. So that is all really just to say that these mental skills, these cognitive interventions that we teach and that the research is also supporting, they really do improve your felt sense of flow, which in turn has, innumerable benefits to performance. And that's really what our goal is, and that's what our aim with the mental barbell is, to teach athletes to find this state often and consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's striking, I'm curious, I don't know if there's any research about it, but this hearing it, like the ego involvement, I'm wondering what the relationship between like um athlete identity and like ego involvement looks like. Because in a lot of my work, I think it's such a hard hit to the ego, and like to the athlete and to the person when they don't perform well because their self-identity is of an athlete.
Hmm.
So I'm curious, what happens then? If you don't perform well because your identity, the way that you structure the world, the way that you view yourself is of a high performing athlete. I'm just, I guess, kind of just like Freudian, kind of just free associating a little bit with my thoughts right now. But that's kind of what was sticking out to me. I'm wondering what that looks like.
Absolutely, and the kind of the double-edged sword here is that the more you think about yourself, the further away from flow you're getting. So in your
Mm,
example, like if I'm thinking I'm a great athlete, I'm a great basketball player, and then all of a sudden I get benched, and now I'm thinking about my like myself as a great basketball player. I'm questioning if I'm a great basketball player. All these things are removing me further and further away from flow because now I'm thinking about myself. And so absolutely, I think that, or like um, changes to an athletic identity. Like you had mentioned, a lot of these players in March Madness now are playing on different teams every year. So your identity as, as a Blue Devil, or as a Tar Heel, or, whatever it might be, that if it changes, now you're thinking about your identity, who you are, who am I on this team? And it's just that fact of thinking about yourself that's removing you from the flow state. So definitely an interesting observation.
mm. Yeah, that's a good point. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, getting towards the end of the podcast here, we didn't want to forget about our mental fitness challenge that we talked about last time, which was a gratitude journal. So three things you're grateful for before you fall asleep each night is what we said. Obviously, you can do it throughout the day, but we're curious to hear what people thought about it and if you've noticed any changes. Um, what I noticed in my practice is kind of like this feeling of feeling less burnt out. I think it was able to provide more perspective and being able to show gratitude that I have this like really great opportunity to do the work that we talk about on this podcast for me at Marist. So I think it was able for me to get like a better perspective and be grateful to even just have the opportunity. Because I think without that perspective, sometimes it's easy to just burn yourself out. Doing the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did I did the gratitude journal this past month, and I would say the biggest thing for me is it made me recognize like the small things that I have. You know,
Mm,
because you're forced to think about three things like you obviously do the big things first: your health, your friends, your family, loved ones. Those are kind of easy to check off the list, but then once you get down to it, it's like you start being more grateful for small things. I'm grateful for being able to take my dog on a walk and watch the sun come up. I'm grateful for I just found a exercise bike at an estate sale, so I was grateful for
nice.
that. There's now I get to ride the bike while I do my work. So it just makes you a little bit more appreciative of the smaller things. I think it's easy to like thank or be thankful for the big things in your life, but to start realizing that those things are everywhere, right? It's not
Mm,
just your health, your friends, your family, your sport, but it's the small moments that you get here and there. So I really appreciated doing the gratitude journal. I think it's something that I will keep up with. Um, we didn't really discuss a new mental fitness challenge. Do we have one? Do you have one in mind, or maybe we could talk about one?
I think so, yeah. So especially today, we talk about like concentration and focus being such a big part of flow state. I'm wondering, I think a good mental challenge is can you sit for 5 minutes each day without your phone and just sit maybe with your thoughts? And when we say sit with your thoughts, could you do it non-judgmentally and just observe them? Because in our work, we talk a lot about thoughts. Obviously, that's a big part of our work. So, are you able to do that? Because I think the more we're able to do this, the focus, skill, and concentration obviously is a skill we can build that up, as well as like just building up the skill that we don't have to be attached to every thought we have either. So that's what I would challenge people to do. I think it's a little bit more challenging and demanding than you think, especially maybe after a long day when you just maybe want to doom scroll on social media or just go onto YouTube and not have to think about anything or sit with those thoughts or even experience those thoughts. So instead of experientially avoiding it, what if we kind of lean into it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we didn't talk about this, but I think there are two considerations for concentration, right? You have internal distractions and external distractions. So in this practice that we're gonna talk or that Anthony there recommended, I want you to think about where you're being distracted, right? Are you being distracted by a noise or are you being distracted by a thought that you have, right? So being able to recognize where maybe your weakness is. Some people are really good at blocking out everything around them, but then they start getting distracted by their own thoughts. Other people are different. They can clear their own mind, but then they hear a dog barking and it derails everything. So there's two sides to that concentration piece. So and then the non-judgmental part I think is awesome. A lot of people get frustrated, when they do get distracted. So like if you hear a dog bark and your brain, runs after it, just bring yourself back, but don't, you're not bad at meditating. You're not bad at mindfulness. It's just, we have to non-judgmentally come back to that place of concentration and focus. So I think that's fantastic. That's an awesome mental fitness challenge for the week.
Yeah, I think, the first step to being good at anything is recognizing that you're bad.
Mm,
So I think it's maybe a silly notion to expect that you're going to be good at it when if you haven't done it before. And just there's not like a right or wrong way to do it. I think a lot of people when they struggle with this kind of exercise is like, I don't know if I'm doing it right, but your version of right could be different than somebody else's. So even just taking the time to sit without your phone has benefits. Um, so again, notice and aware of like what that voice is saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a wrap for episode 12 of the Mental Barbell podcast. If you found value in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a teammate or coach who needs to hear it. For more mental performance training and personalized coaching, visit thementalbarbell.com or follow us on social media at The Mental Barbell. Keep training your mind like you train your body, and we'll see you next time.